Welcome everyone to the Coalition for Marriage YouTube channel. We are the UK's largest pro-marriage organisation, representing individuals and groups who support this notion of one man, one woman marriage. And yes, we recognise other relationship types exist in civil society, and more relationship types I'm sure will begin to exist as we go forward. But we think there's something very special about one man, one woman marriage. It brings something to society which nothing else really brings, and history and all the literature shows that. So that's why we're very concerned about it. And we are UK-wide, as well as being UK-wide. And let me just remind you, the UK, Great Britain and Northern Ireland, but also Ireland is made up of Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, of course. And we've got somebody with us today. I'm very, very pleased to have David Quinn with us today. David writes and comments on social issues, political issues, religious issues in the South and in the North. David, would you like to say hello to our viewers?
Hello, everyone, and thanks for having me on the show.
Well, it's a privilege to have you. You're also director of something called the Iona Institute. Do you want to just take a moment and tell us what that is?
Well, it wouldn't be miles away from something like the Christian Institute in Britain, which we have contacts with on and off down the years. Very similar outlook on life, more Catholic focused and evangelical focused, but we try to be interdenominational. And so, you know, down the years, we've been involved in debates, obviously, about marriage very heavily, the right to life, proper relationship between church and state, future denominational education, conscience rights, all those kind of things.
And looking at the stuff you write and the things you get involved with, you're very much a barometer of what's going on in the island of Ireland, really. So the North and the South. And it's quite interesting because Ireland as a place, and this is why I'm so interested in talking to you and why I think our viewers should be too, because Ireland as a place is quite unique. It's slightly different to England, Scotland and Wales. And yeah, you know, Scotland and Wales are progressing in a way well ahead of England, and perhaps, you know, in a way that some of us think is very worrying. But in Ireland, you've got this unique religious dimension to politics. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and how it affects all the debates that are going on?
Well, it's different north and south of the border, obviously, because the south, you know, very historically Catholic dominated, and the north much more divided, you know, for with all kinds of effects. Some of which have been bad, as we know. And so the North has been kind of majority Protestant for most of its 100-year history, because actually they're marking the centenary of the founding of the North as a kind of its own kind of jurisdiction this year. The South, by the way, is doing the same thing because, of course, they partitioned in 1922, and the reason they partitioned was actually largely because of religion. So the majority northern population obviously wanted to remain part of the United Kingdom, and the South wanted to go its own way. And again, as I say, the South was very predominantly Catholic, like over 90% of the population, and at the time of independence, very heavily practicing as well. But to begin with the South, you know, after we became independent from Britain in 1922, one of the ways of showing our independence was to kind of become super Catholic and to make the Catholic Church here a really dominant influence. Because this is kind of a way of showing, well, Britain, you tried to destroy the church, and you had the penal laws and all that kind of thing. Now we're going to put it on a complete pedestal to distinguish ourselves, not just politically, but culturally, religiously, everything. And this kind of, if you like, over-dominance of the Catholic Church created a backlash that we're living with today. So in a way, the Catholic Church almost politically enjoys negative influence. That is to say, if the Catholic Church gets involved in an issue, it nearly damages the issue.
Yeah, reactionary.
Then like in the North, the Catholic Church would be stronger because there's not the same level of backlash.
And they've got the DUP in the North.
Yeah,
which is it's just remarkable. You know, the thought of having something like that in England or in Wales is, well, goodness me.
Yeah, so we have a situation now where the only pro-life mainstream party on either side of the border is the DUP. There's one small party in the south with one TD, or what you'd call an MP. It's called Aontú, which is an Irish word. It's an excellent TD in it, and he's strongly pro-life, but it's again a one politician or one TD party. So the only significant party political presence on the island that's pro-life is the DUP. And you hear quite a lot of Catholics remarking about that, by the way, that here we have like only the DUP and all the traditionally pro-life parties in the south have gone completely to the wrong side on this issue. I mean, yeah, and it's only the DUP holding out in the north. So the traditionally kind of nationalist party SDLP has completely, gone to the wrong side on this. So is Sinn Féin. There's a growing party in the north that's now, in fact, its leader is Justice Minister, although Stormont is not reconvened. That's the Alliance Party, and it is super quote unquote progressive on all of these kind of issues.
Interesting. So let's you picked up a phrase which you've used, which I think you were quoting somebody else about intellectual no-fly zones. And I'm interested in some of those. And the marriage debate would be the first. That generally speaking, the marriage debate, kind of redefinition of marriage. Do you want to, that we perhaps know how that went in England back in 2012, 13? And that covered Scotland and what, to an extent, covered Scotland, and Scotland, has followed with its own kind of arrangements, and of course Wales too. But do you want to tell us a little bit about how that played out in the north and the south in Ireland?
Okay, so we had a constitutional definition of marriage that was the traditional definition. So therefore, they couldn't change the definition by an act of parliament, like in Britain. It had to be done by a constitutional referendum, so a vote of the people. So this happened in 2015, and I was very heavily involved in that campaign. And anyway, the constitution was changed by a margin of 62% to 38%. So like it was a heavy victory for those who wanted to change the definition. And I mean, I saw the whole thing as kind of a symptom of the fact that our view of the family was changing incredibly radically anyway. And we had lost sight of why marriage evolved as a kind of social institution, never mind all the religious aspects, but the fact that, marriage worldwide, historically, from an evolutionary point of view, has always, for society, been about trying to get the man and the woman who bring a child into the world to commit to each other and raise that child throughout its childhood, and then hopefully stay together afterwards. And we just seem to lose sight of that thing almost completely, and we just saw it as a kind of marriage as a vehicle for adults. And we lost sight of things like complementarity of the sexes. Therefore, the importance of like the child's natural parents raising the child together.
Did you have same-sex civil partnerships before marriage?
We did from a few years before,
right.
And it was obviously a step on the road to what happened in 2015. But you see, in fact, there was new statistics out today. There were the kind of vital statistics produced by our kind of Central Statistics Office, kind of our official statistical body. And, you could just see there again how drastically the family has changed in Ireland. So the number of births outside marriage is now nearly up to British levels. So it's about 41.5%. I think it's about 46% over in the UK. And it varies obviously by region. Same here. The number of couples who cohabit is now like at American levels. It was unheard of like 25 years ago. Now it's at American levels. The birth rate in Ireland is about as low as Britain. And also, our marriage rate is about as low as Britain, and our birth rate has gone well below replacement.
And is the social demographic kind of similar to the rest of the UK? So it's generally the wealthier people that get married.
Correct.
And the less well off are more likely not to get married, and therefore less likely to enjoy the benefits that marriage brings in terms of security, stability, everything else that goes with it.
Yeah, 100%. So we put out a study a couple of years back, and it was based on, official census data, and it showed that the more affluent you are, the more likely you are to marry, and the less well off you are, the less likely, and also the more likely you are to divorce. So if you compare the highest socioeconomic group with the lowest is half as likely to marry, twice as likely to break up. All right, so it's a huge marriage gap. So it seems to be an incredibly commonplace kind of thing. And what I often say to people is, so you have a lot of middle class people with very on the surface kind of liberal values, but they live quite traditional lives. So, it's absolutely commonplace for kind of middle class, professional, university educated people who espouse all these kind of guardianist type or BBC or Irish Times type views to say, oh, I have all these really modern views and progressive views, but they nearly all marry before they have children, right? Now, why do they do that? Because deep down, they see it makes sense. But if you actually ask them to defend that proposition in public, they never do. So it's a kind of reverse. It's kind of
very similar in the rest of the UK too. Very, very similar model. It's do as I say, not as I do. Which is very, very interesting and very, very telling. When all the evidence, and even the government's own evidence that it commissions, shows that growing up with your married mum and dad gives you not a marginal improvement in your outcomes as a child, but a vast improvement, significant improvement that nothing else really reaches. Why? Well, there are lots of conjecture and lots of research about that, but the facts are the facts. And that's not to say, of course, that, some people in marriage situations, it doesn't work out well, and some people in unmarried situations, it works out great. On a population basis, and in terms of government policy, that should be how they're looking at a population basis. Marriage really is the thing that makes a difference.
And you see, again, if your average Guardian type or Irish Times, that's our equivalent, reader didn't believe that, then why do they nearly always get married first before they have kids? So deep down they know it, but they just won't say it. And then they condemn those who do defend the proposition and defend the facts and defend the way they actually live and practice. They absolutely condemn them, and yet that's the way they live. So it's kind of, as you say, kind of reverse hypocrisy where they refuse to preach what they practice.
So what about the state and family and education? So, for example, Scotland, Wales, very much the state is trying to say, look, we think we know how to bring up your kids better than you do, so we're gonna tell you about how you educate them. You're not allowed to take them out of school for certain things. We're going to tell you how you must discipline them. Scotland even wanted a named persons scheme where you had a public employee who had ultimate responsibility for your child, not the parent. Well, that was kicked into touch, thankfully. How does that compare with what's going on in the north and the south of Ireland?
Increasingly there would be moves to kind of encroach on what parents think is best for their children. So there's moves to kind of radically reform sex ed in the south. And I think there's similar moves up in the north as well, although I wouldn't swear to that. And now there's kind of growing voices, although it hasn't reached the heart of government yet, but this is the way these things tend to work, because they tend to be proposed by the kind of more quote unquote radical people, and then they get taken up by the government because it gets pressed on the government by all the NGOs and the quangos and all that kind of thing, and by the media. So apart from making sex ed a lot more kind of radical than it has been, there are proposals now by some politicians and groups and campaign groups and advocacy groups to make it compulsory.
Yeah, so you're catching up with Wales and Scotland, essentially, which is what they've done.
But what might save us is the Constitution, because the Constitution is very strong on parental rights, and that hasn't been taken out yet. So therefore, you can't, like a religion class is not compulsory. So you can withdraw your child because of the Constitution. And so I'm assuming that if they try to make sex ed compulsory, that if somebody took the constitutional case, they'd win. But it is nonetheless the way the thinking is going. And what do parents know? And we know best. And schools must be vehicles for social engineering and all.
Interesting. And what about marriage and the church? Obviously, Scotland, Wales, the national churches have fallen and have said, we're going to, whatever the scriptures say, we're going to endorse same-sex marriages, or we're going to embrace same-sex unions. England, the Church of England is going through a Living in Love and Faith consultation at the time of making this video. The conclusion's looking pretty obvious. It's only the independent churches really who are holding fast. Wesleyan, they've gone. What's happening in Northern and Southern Ireland then? Marriage in the churches.
So what's happened with the Catholic Church is, you know, the traditional teaching remains. And I think if they try to change that, it would obviously have to come from Rome ultimately. And I think that would cause the most massive split within the church. So there's no real moves on that front. So what's happening instead is they've kind of dialed down talking about it much, and just marriage across the board. So it'd be very rare to hear a church leader kind of express concern that not enough parents are getting married, and there's too many parents breaking up, and there's you know, too many to see cohabitation as a substitute for marriage. So they just steer away from all that kind of stuff. Now up in the north, you know, you still got a pretty strong evangelical presence, and they're pretty solid. And the Church of Ireland, while it would have pretty liberal elements up in the north, they tend to be less so than in the south. And the Church of Ireland in the north is much bigger than in the south. Right. So it tends to predominate. So I would say that overall, the Church of Ireland, which is basically obviously our Anglicanism, hasn't drifted as far afield as its equivalent in England, Scotland, or Wales. Not yet, anyway.
Yeah, not yet. Yeah. Anyway. Well, yeah. It's interesting because about a year or so ago, the Vatican released half a side of A4 saying, well, you know, the Scripture says that marriage is between a man and a woman, therefore we can't do anything about that. Whereas the Church of England, it's got, you know, 450 pages of a living in love and faith consultation, just can't seem to get there. I've noticed you comment in your tweets about Louise Perry's latest book on the sexual revolution and arguments against the sexual revolution. Do you want to tell us why? And of course, she recommends, she's a feminist and a very popular, credible feminist among feminists, but she recommends marriage, and actually that we need to restore the institution of marriage for the sake of women. Do you want to tell me why you commented on that?
Well, because it's one of these books that's come out that's kind of provoking debate on kind of modern sexual ethics, and wondering, has the sex revolution been good for people and for women in particular? And I've often given a talk in schools on broadly similar lines. So, like, obviously, modern sexual ethics is all about maximizing the freedom of the individual, whereas Christian sexual ethics is about maximizing the welfare of the family. So we stress commitments very strongly, getting married, after that having kids, staying together. So this is not about maximizing individual freedom, it's about maximizing the welfare of the family. But the kind of modern view is, let's maximize what the individual wants and as much freedom as possible. And so modern sexual ethics really only has one ethic: anything goes between consenting adults. Yes. Now, so relationships don't have to come into it. It's completely up to yourself. And so this opens up the way for kind of hookup culture, as they call it, in a big way. The whole Tinder phenomenon of meeting somebody tonight, possibly meeting somebody else tomorrow night. And I think Louise Perry's point of view is a lot of women feel incredibly burnt by this, because it's not how we're made ultimately for that kind of.
I mean, men are the winners, aren't they? It's ridiculous. It's like, you know, if man designed a hookup culture, it couldn't get any easier for man. Yeah, you know, it's absolutely insane.
But... Yeah, I mean, if you're a man with no ethics, you know, absolutely. But again, Louise Perry's point is it's really shortchanging women in a dramatic way, and she also makes the point. This is a point made by others as well, that the ubiquity of porn is having a devastating effect, because it's normalizing behavior that actually is really bad for the kind of general culture and the Tinder culture. And she makes the point, it's really bad for women, because a lot of men who have kind of grown up in porn are expecting women to behave in a certain way.
And the stats for marriage aren't good, you know, kind of porn users before or during marriage. The stats for it damaging marriage are quite evident in the literature. It's not a good thing for prolonged, useful, sustainable relationships.
Well, sure. I mean, like, how can it be? Because it just, you know, becomes addictive for people. And again, it normalizes behavior that actually nobody should want normalized. And kind of, what wife wants that kind of stuff normalized?
So what about things like cancel culture? You know, we're beginning to fight back with bills about in parliamentary bills about free speech in universities and all sorts of things like that, which are really good, healthy things. to really argue against this cancel culture. So it's not about open debate. It's about, I don't think that what you've got to say should be allowed to be said in public. Therefore, we're going to not let you say it. Which, we're only going to allow people to say things that we agree with, not things that you agree with. How does that work over in the north and the south of Ireland?
Well, I mean, you were mentioning earlier that I was quoting some journalist in America who was actually talking about the war in Ukraine, and he was saying America's intellectual no-fly zone where you can't have a kind of on hawkish opinion, if you like, of that war. But I thought the phrase is a very good one. And cancel culture essentially tries to turn a country into an intellectual no-fly zone where only one opinion is allowed and everything else gets shut down. And so if you don't have to receive you're denied platforms all over the place. And I've written in my column in the Sunday Times that we kind of have almost a pre-cancel culture, by which I mean you don't even have to cancel that speaker because he's not going to get invited or she's not going to get invited. So you don't even begin to have a debate, and not going to give that person a newspaper column, not going to have that person on a TV or radio program. So there doesn't even have to be outrage because you've pre-cancelled everybody.
Interesting. Well, here's a funny thing, because I was across in the north for a 2-week speaking tour just before lockdown, and one hotel kicked us out actually, when it dawned on them what we were talking about. And one of their guests said, "Why have you allowed them?" We were asked to leave, which is quite interesting. They've since apologised and refunded our fee, I might add. So all credit to them. But that's interesting how. So you would say the cancel culture is alive and kicking in the north and the south as much as it is in the rest of the UK.
Extremely, like in the run up to the abortion referendum in the south in 2018, which of course unfortunately they repealed the pro-life amendment to the Constitution by 2-1. There was, attempts to get pro-life speakers into hotels, and there'd be a campaign by pro-choice activists, and the hotel wouldn't go ahead with the booking. So a very similar kind of situation to what you're talking about. But what I notice is, same in Britain now, to a lesser extent here, you kind of have something of a bit of a kind of liberal civil war breaking out in free speech. So you have to kind of what I call liberal authoritarians on one side who say no platform for people we disagree with. And then you have kind of liberals, if you like, saying, well, we still believe in free speech and you should still hear from people you don't like and points of view you don't like. And so in Ireland anyway, kind of conservative traditional Christian view has become so weak that our ability to defend free speech has become very weakened. So in a way, the only people I think who are going to keep the public space open are genuine free speech liberals, and they're having a fight with their authoritarian counterparts. But the authoritarian counterparts at the moment, I would say, have the upper hand.
Now, I recognise, right, that both the north and the south of Ireland, they're incredibly complex places which those of us who haven't lived there for a sustained period could never hope to understand or diagnose, right? But in terms of going forward, and that's one thing I learned when I was over there for 2 weeks was, wow, that's incredible. It's so complicated. But going forward, right, if in terms of promoting the idea and the benefits of marriage and getting society to recognise that again, what's the way forward in the north and the south of Ireland?
Well, I would say, first of all, about politics in the south. I mean, it's in a way, it's quite simple to understand in this sense. We want to do everything the opposite of what the Catholic Church says on these kind of hot button topics. Right. So dead easy to understand. This massive reaction against this past dominance. We want to go from super Catholic to super woke. So I would say, the Republic is not so different from Scotland or Wales. There's a kind of, I don't know, Celtic inferiority complex or something going on, where we have to overdo certain things in order to shine in the world. You see the same thing in New Zealand or even Canada. These smaller countries wanting to shine about something, so it's wokery. And now in the north, that is complicated because it's a much more religiously diverse place, and there's tendencies and sub-tendencies within unionism and the same in nationalism, and then you've got this alliance party emerging. So it is more complicated up there, but I would say because you have this kind of strong evangelical presence, I would say traditional voices are so much stronger in the north than they are in the south. So there's I mean, like a guy like Jeffrey Donaldson, the head of the DUP, is rock solid on all these things. But anyway, you ask, what's the future in terms of marriage? So I would say what's going to have to happen, and it's going to take a long time. We're going to have to go through the lived experience of what a society looks like in which marriage is not strong anymore.
Right.
And we're going to have to look at the casualties of that, which will be first and foremost children whose parents have never got together in the first place, or who have broken up, or have been in multiple relationships and who lack that stability. And I think then, having gone through that, then maybe there'll be some kind of a reassessment. I mean, somebody said, learn from your parents or learn the hard way. And I would change that around a little bit. Learn from tradition or learn the hard way. And so there's a reason why this tradition of marriage evolved everywhere. I mean, even when one man could marry more than one woman, was always kind of, the mother and father at the heart of it. And there's a reason why cultures, no matter how varied they are, develop this. So it's one of the strongest traditions in human history. And we're just casting it aside now. And I think we're going to have to learn the hard way why it evolved. And then, having gone through the experience of kind of ditching it, maybe we reconstruct it in decades to come.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, you raise a point which I don't know if you've read Katie Faust's book. So she runs an organization called Them Before Us.
Yeah, I'm aware of her,
Yeah. And she makes the point that actually society should be making decisions not on adults' desires and needs, but on priorities for children and what works out best for kids. And we just, in all areas of life, some that you would be passionate about and that most people would as well, we just seem to be thinking, well, the kids are just going to have to suffer because the adults need to indulge themselves. But there is hope. You think the hope is going to take a while and it's going to get worse before it gets better?
I think we'll have to learn the hard way. All right. I mean, for example, there's a debate. Well, it's not a proper debate because, again, we don't tend to do proper debates anymore. But the thinking of allowing commercial surrogacy and international surrogacy, and making that completely legal and legit, and making it very easy for parents to go to Ukraine and hire a surrogate to come home with the baby. And you try to raise issues like, well, okay, let's just exploit low-income women. You then divide motherhood maybe into three women. You've got the social mother who raises the child. You've got the birth mother who gives birth to the child. And you've got the genetic mother who's the egg donor. And is this going to have no consequences whatsoever down the line? But again, it's all about, well, what do the adults want?
And I'll put a link in this video to our interview with Katie Faust, because she deals very powerfully with those things in a book and on a video. Listen, I know you're very busy. I think you're doing a wonderful job in sticking up for these things. You're a voice of reason. You really are a bellwether of what's going on in the north and the south. A lot of people listen to you, a lot of people follow you, and I hope that more begin to do that. Thank you for what you're doing. I really would encourage you, and I would encourage our supporters in the north and the south and all around the UK just to speak up and stand up. This is how we change things. The fact that we've been so quiet is the reason why things have got to where they've got to. And in order for things to change is going to require us speaking up and making our voices heard. But you're doing a fantastic job. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing that and for joining us today. David Quinn, what a privilege it is to speak to you.
Great to speak to you. Bye-bye.
Take care now.